Over the last 2 decades, the Foundation for Russian-American Economic Cooperation, or FREAC, has worked to strengthen economic and community ties with Russia, especially at the regional level, bringing people and ideas together to broaden understanding and to expand cooperation. Our accomplishments are rooted in the belief that relationships are keys to our success. And it all started in 1989.
20 years ago was a tumultuous time with a lot of change going on. There started to be the opening for the creation of co-ops. And we saw in that a wonderful opportunity. So the natural thing felt like, how can we find some people who have skills and knowledge in the U.S. that might be helpful in terms of what they could pass along.
So a small group of consultants traveled to the Soviet Union, eager to work with the emerging cooperatives, the first legal form of business in the Soviet Union, to share with them best practices of Western business. They were eager to learn and interested, and we came back ready to help.
Reflecting on what our experience had been, I think that everybody felt very much that this should be just the beginning, and that we needed to create a vehicle through which to really continue this work.
The Foundation for Soviet American Economic Cooperation was launched, and after many months of hard work, we held our first U.S.-Soviet board meeting in November of 1989. The Goodwill Games held the following year propelled our efforts.
It turned out to be a very successful event. I think that people from the Soviet Union, together with the people from the Seattle area, and the athletes and all the arts and cultural events, people rubbing shoulders and living in homes with each other, kind of melted the Cold War a little bit.
As a result of contacts made during the Goodwill Games, we took our first trade mission to the Soviet Far East, opening our eyes to this region of the Soviet Union. By our next trade mission, the region was called the Russian Far East, and over the years we witnessed many major events, with opening of consulates in both of our regions, hosting the first Russian ambassador to the U.S., culminating in the visit of Boris Yeltsin.
The outpouring of friendship to President Yeltsin in Seattle, I think, helped us immensely. We normally would line up all the police officers and before he gets on the plane that protected him while he was here so he could shake their hands. We did that, but then the second line, the line that was closest to the airplane door, was all the Russian foreign exchange students who were going to school here. And I think he was dumbfounded. By the time he started up the steps of the airplane, he actually had tears in his eyes, that this was a state that cared about these kids, that wanted to educate these kids, and wanted to build a better relationship with the Russian Far East.
President Boris Yeltsin called for a special relationship between the U.S. West Coast and the Russian Far East, and in June of 1995, Seattle was host to its first meeting, and FREAC was named its secretariat. The U.S. West Coast Russian Far East Ad Hoc Working Group has been meeting on both sides of the Pacific during both good and challenging times. Later, it was renamed the Russian-American Pacific Partnership. RAP continues to be an effective vehicle to facilitate and deepen cooperation between our two countries.
Это организация, которая помогает развитию бизнеса, помогает соединить в своем, скажем так, в своих вопросах правительства двух стран, России и Америки.
You know, in particular, FREAC has been able to be an honest broker that doesn't necessarily represent any one interest, but rather represents a combination of government interests, individuals, businesses.
People who happen to be from different cultures who find that they have things they can learn from one another. And FREAC has really been instrumental in finding people that want to make those kinds of connections and putting them together and helping them be successful in some joint activity and a joint development of better understanding.
In 2006, then First Deputy Prime Minister Medvedev visited a center on Sakhalin that was the result of a FREAC-facilitated partnership between two hospitals to encourage young mothers to breastfeed.
Да, ну вот, в общем-то, общаясь с коллегами с больницы МАГИ из Питтсбурга, очень много было полезных, интересных вещей узнать, их подходы, их методы работы. И совместная работа, наверное, пойдет только на пользу людей.
I think the baseball program is probably one of the most significant things we ever did. And those cops and those kids from both sides of the Pacific coming together, and the American kids teaching the Russian kids about baseball, and the Russian kids teaching American kids about a lot of things in the Soviet Far East or the Russian Far East that they would never have dreamed of seeing.
From this grassroots baseball exchange between Olympia and Sakhalin emerged a successful law enforcement partnership, sharing ideas, best practices, and information to improve cooperation between our two regions.
Your first impression on the criminal situation here in Sakhalin and specifically in the city of Yuzhno?
Well, what I've found is that crime seems to be the same everywhere. We deal with crime in the same way. We've been to the training academy for the police officers. We train very similarly. What we've seen tonight would be a typical day in my city and many of the cities that we have.
And it all started with baseball, and FREAC made that happen.
Through all of our activities, FREAC works to broaden understanding, and the many exchanges that we have hosted over the last 2 decades, and the delegates who have lived in people's homes in our community, is a very important way to achieve this goal.
In the spring of 2004, we adopted our daughter, Ani, from a small town outside of Vladivostok, Artyom. We brought our daughter home, and then looking through the Magnolia newspaper, small town newspaper, artist from Vladivostok there was a show on Queen Anne's, small one, and one especially spoke to me. And turns out later that it was painted the same day our daughter was born. We met Carol through FREAC that night, and we asked, are there any home host opportunities? To be the next delegation was a group, government workers from Vladivostok and Artyom, Russia. The mayor of the small town was part of the delegation of the group that we home hosted, the exact person who signed the adoption papers for our daughter. At this point in our lives, having a young child, we can't travel the world like we'd like to. And so it's nice to have the world come to us. In a way, it feels like a diplomatic act to have the world in our home. And so our lives are deeply, deeply touched.
I was initially skeptical of any organization in Seattle that was focused on dealing with the Soviet Union, but I quickly came to see that FREAC was different.
It happened in Seattle, and much of that is because of the board and the supporters and the staff and the leadership at FREAC, and I can't speak highly enough of what they've done.
FREAC's role in helping our countries understand each other better is really critical.
Having FREAC continue to persist in brokering understanding, brokering dialogue is really important. I think it's really important for the Northwest with companies like Microsoft and Boeing and others that are huge trading partners in Russia, but really for all of us.
The world is lucky to have FREAC.
Thank you, FREAC, for blessing our lives in so many ways.
Say is thank you. Thank you.